On a quiet morning out on the grasslands, a wildlife rescuer pulled over after discovering a mother bobcat lying motionless, with her tiny kittens beside her, barely clinging to life. Among them, only one fragile soul still showed signs of breathing, a kitten later named Scout. Rushed to a rescue center, Scout fought for every breath, but despite the best efforts of modern medicine, his small body and fragile spirit slowly began to fade. Then an unprecedented decision was made, placing Scout beside Daisy, a gentle domestic cat who had just lost her own litter. What followed was far more than an ordinary rescue. It was a bond that crossed species lines, challenging everything we understand about instinct and motherhood. Could a house cat save the life of a wild bobcat? And what would be the cost of such a miracle? Before we dive into this deeply moving and almost unbelievable story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more heart-touching stories like this. A tiny dying breath in the vast wilderness, almost imperceptible against the vast, indifferent expanse of the night. Emily's fingers trembled as she adjusted the IV drip, her face a mask of weary despair under the harsh glare of the intensive care unit lights. Beside her, Maria's hand rested lightly on the transparent incubator, her thumb tracing the condensation that beaded on the inside. Inside, a miniature shadow, barely more than a bundle of matted fur, shuddered. This was Scout, a bobcat kitten, and he was losing his fight. Every shallow breath he took was a testament to his fading will, a desperate, defiant whimper against the inevitable. Scout felt a cold, sharp pain, then a dull warmth spreading through his tiny leg. The giant, smelling of unfamiliar things, antiseptic and something sweet, like dried leaves, had done this before, each time a new ache, but also a strange, creeping relief. His body was a collection of pains, a dull throb in his stomach, a dizzying emptiness that made his head swim. The hunger gnawed, a constant sharp reminder of the world outside, a world he had only known as cold, dangerous, and empty. Now there were soft things, a warmth that wasn't the sun on a rock, but something deeper, more consistent. He tried to move, to curl tighter against the strange, soft ground, but his limbs were heavy, unresponsive. The world had been a blur of terror, the sudden rush, the crushing grip, the dark, suffocating box. Fear had spiked his small heart, making his breath catch in his throat. He'd hissed, a tiny, futile sound, but his voice was weak, his body a fragile shell. Now the fear was a dull hum beneath the roaring emptiness in his belly. The giants had gentle hands, but they were so big, so utterly overwhelming. They moved with a strange grace, their faces blurry shapes above him. He didn't understand their soft murmurs, their strange, comforting sounds. He only understood the hunger, the cold, and the overwhelming desire to hide, to disappear. A new giant now, smelling different, but still big. This one had a small, round dish, pressed gently to his nose. A strange scent wafted from it, not the scent of prey, but something sweet and thin. He recoiled, whimpering, a feeble protest against the intrusion. Food had been a scarce, brutal thing in his short life, fought for, snatched in a flurry of teeth and claws. This soft offering felt like a trick. He turned his head away, the movement an exhausting effort. The giant sighed, a soft sound, and the dish retreated. He felt a fleeting relief. Then the gnawing hunger returned, a relentless demon in his gut. The humans, Emily and Maria, watched him, their expressions a mixture of desperation and heartbreak. Scout hadn't eaten in days, not since they found him, barely clinging to life in a culvert. Every attempt to syringe feed, to tempt him with specialized formulas, had been met with the same weak, defiant refusal. He was starving himself, giving up. His body was failing, but it was his spirit that seemed to be eroding faster. Then a new smell, faint but distinct, drifted into his small world. Different. Not the giants, not the sweet, thin food. This was warm, soft, familiar in a way he couldn't quite place, yet it stirred something deep within him, a memory of comfort he didn't know he possessed. It was a cat smell, But not a big, scary one. A small one, like him, but older, calmer. He barely registered the giant shifting him, a gentle hand under his small body. He was lifted, then settled into a new, softer warmth. The warmth was undeniable, enveloping him, chasing away the pervasive chill that had seeped into his bones. A soft rumble vibrated against his side, a continuous, soothing sound. He'd never heard anything like it before, not in the wild. It wasn't a growl of warning or the harsh crackle of dry leaves. It was contentment. The smell intensified. This was a living, breathing warmth, not an artificial one. He felt a soft, insistent nudge against his head, a gentle lick. It startled him, a jolt of primal fear, but the warmth remained. The soft rumble continued. This new creature, smaller than the giants, but still bigger than him, was a blur of soft fur and quiet purrs. He didn't understand why it was here, why it pressed against him, but the relentless chill in his heart began to recede, just a fraction. He felt a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor go through his small body. He closed his eyes, not in fear, but in a tentative surrender to the unfamiliar, comforting warmth. The world had shrunk to a cold, hard plain beneath him, unyielding and silent. A vast, echoing hunger clawed at his tiny belly, a frantic, desperate rhythm that pulsed with the fading beat of his siblings nearby. His eyes, still mostly blue and clouded with the newness of sight, saw only the blurry outline of an absence where warmth and safety used to be. Every nerve ending screamed for the comforting rumble, the soft lick, the protective presence that had vanished into the biting wind. He was alone, utterly and profoundly, on the brink of a darkness deeper than any night he'd yet known. 18 months prior, the phone had shrieked, a jarring intrusion into the early morning quiet. Emily, still half asleep, had answered, her heart instantly sinking at the breathless, panicked voice on the other end. "Bobcat," the woman had stammered, "on the side of Highway 12. Looks like she's gone. And I think I saw movement." Movement. That single word had galvanized Emily, sending a jolt of adrenaline through her. She grabbed her gear, the familiar weight of the rescue kit, a grim comfort in her hands, and sped towards the coordinates, her mind already racing through protocols, worst-case scenarios, and the faint, persistent hope that always propelled her. The scene when she arrived was exactly as she'd feared, and yet somehow worse. The mother bobcat lay sprawled, a victim of the merciless speed of human invention. Her beautiful wild spirit extinguished, and then the movement. A giant shadow loomed over him, blotting out the pale sky. A different smell, sharp and alien, assaulted his tiny nose. He instinctively tried to burrow deeper into the damp earth, whimpering, a sound so small it was barely audible. A vast, warm wall of something soft yet firm pressed against him. He felt himself lifted, suspended in air, the world tilting precariously. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the dull ache of hunger. He thrashed, tiny claws uselessly scratching at the unknown, but the grip was gentle, unwavering. He was deposited into a soft, contained space, a new kind of darkness, but one that held a strange, nascent warmth. Emily had found them, 3 tiny bundles of matted fur, barely a week old, huddled against their mother's lifeless body. The wind was whipping, cold and unforgiving. 2 were already gone, their miniature hearts stilled. Their journey ended before it truly began. But one, the smallest, no bigger than her palm, still quivered. Scout. His tiny chest rose and fell with a desperate, shallow rhythm. His fur was damp, his eyes barely open, but there was a flicker, a stubborn spark that Emily recognized immediately as the will to live. The sting was sudden, sharp and invasive. A brief, intense burning sensation on his fragile skin, a tiny pinprick that made him flinch and cry out, a sound barely larger than a squeak. He instinctively tried to pull away, to escape this new torment, but the giant hand held him steady, firm but not crushing. Then, almost immediately, a strange, creeping warmth began to spread beneath his skin, chasing away some of the cold. It wasn't the warmth of his mother, but it was a warmth, a promise of something other than the icy grip of the world. He was wrapped, swaddled in softness, held against a new steady beat, a rhythm that was foreign but not entirely unwelcome. Emily's voice was low, soothing, as she drove. She talked to Scout, telling him he was safe, that he was strong, that they would fight for him. She knew the odds were stacked against him. Orphaned bobcat kittens, especially those so young and exposed, rarely made it. But Scout, even in his profound weakness, had something: a fight. At the clinic, Dr. Aris moved with practiced efficiency, her expression grim but determined. Fluids, antibiotics, warmth, every second counted. Scout received his first injection, a tiny jolt that registered as pain, then an immediate, profound relief as the fluid began to hydrate his minuscule body. He was placed in an incubator, a warm, soft nest in a surrogate womb of human ingenuity. The liquid was strange, not the familiar taste of his mother, but it was warm, rich, and utterly life-sustaining. He latched on instinctively, a fierce, desperate suckling that drained the tiny bottle quickly. The hunger, that constant gnawing void, began to recede, replaced by a satisfying fullness. He purred, a tiny, reedy rumble that vibrated through his entire body. The giants were not just shadows, they were providers. They offered warmth, food, and a soft, steady presence that, slowly, carefully, began to erode the edges of his deep-seated fear. Days blurred into a routine of feeding, warmth, and the constant, reassuring presence of the giants. Emily especially. Her scent became familiar, her touch gentle. He still tensed sometimes, a primal echo of the wild, but the fear was slowly giving way to a tentative trust. He was in an incubator, a glass box that kept him safe and warm, and one day a new presence appeared. Another creature, smaller than the giants, yet larger than him. A sleek, multicolored being with bright, assessing eyes. It watched him, its tail twitching, a quiet curiosity emanating from it. This was Daisy, a house cat who had wandered into the clinic after her own misadventures and decided to adopt the place, and everyone in it, as her own. She was a shadow, too, but a different kind. A shadow of comfort, of an unexpected companionship that would soon change everything. When conventional medicine fails, what's left? The world was a blur of overwhelming smells and the terrifying thrum of the giant creatures moving around him. He'd been snatched from the only safety he'd ever known. The rough fur of his mother, the familiar scent of pine needles and damp earth. Now the air tasted sterile, metallic, and cold. He felt a sharp, brief sting, then a sudden rush of warmth spreading through his tiny body, easing the ache that had gnawed at his belly for days. The giant, Emily, her voice a low rumble, wrapped him in something soft and impossibly warm. He buried his small head into its folds, the faint scent of human detergent strangely comforting, a new kind of safe. Back then, the frantic days blurred into an exhausting cycle of feeding, cleaning, and whispered hopes. Two of his litter mates, smaller and weaker, hadn't made it. He remembered their sudden stillness, the way the giant's murmurs changed from gentle encouragement to quiet, grief-stricken whispers. He'd felt their warmth leave the blanket beside him, a cold emptiness taking its place. Now only he remained, a tiny spark clinging to life. Emily, her face etched with worry, would try to coax him to drink from a tiny bottle, but his insides felt twisted, resisting the creamy liquid. Each swallow was an effort, often followed by a sickening wave of nausea. He wanted to eat, his body craved the sustenance, but something deep within him rebelled. The giant's touch was always gentle, but the fear still lingered, a phantom coldness from the time before, when hunger had been a constant, gnawing companion, and the world outside the den a place of sudden, loud danger. Dr. Mendez, another giant whose hands were surprisingly deft despite their size, would press on his tiny belly, listening with a cold, round disc. His voice, usually calm, was now laced with a new urgency. His digestive system is shutting down, Emily. We've tried multiple formulas, antibiotics, probiotics. He's just not absorbing nutrients. We're running out of options. The words, though incomprehensible, carried a heavy weight, a sense of finality that tightened the air. Scout felt the vibrations of the doctor's voice, a low rumble that unsettled him, reminding him of the growls of predators he'd only instinctually known to fear. The familiar, sterile smell of the clinic pressed in, a constant reminder of his vulnerability. He just wanted to be warm, safe, and for the gnawing discomfort in his belly to stop. He wanted the soft, familiar feel of his mother's fur, the deep rhythm of her purr. Emily's shoulders slumped. Despair, a bitter taste in the air, seemed to seep into the very walls of the clinic. She ran a hand through her hair, her gaze fixed on Scout's tiny, struggling form. He felt her shift, the subtle change in her scent, from determined hope to something heavier, more resigned. It was a familiar scent, one he'd encountered in the wild when his mother had to give up on a hunt, a mix of disappointment and exhaustion. He curled tighter into himself, a primal instinct to protect his vulnerable core. The world felt too big, too hard. Then, Lizzie, another of the giants, her voice usually light, spoke with an uncharacteristic gravity. "What about a surrogate?" Emily looked at her, then back at Scout, a flicker of something new in her eyes. "A domestic cat, you mean?" Lizzie nodded. "It's unorthodox, risky, but if his system can't handle the formula, perhaps a natural milk source, even from a different species, might be his only chance." The words hung in the sterile air, a radical, almost unthinkable suggestion, yet one that held a tiny, desperate spark of hope. Scout, hearing the change in their voices, felt a subtle shift, a new tension, but also a faint possibility, like the distant rustle of leaves that could mean either danger or an approaching meal. He didn't understand, but he felt the shift, a quiet hum in the air, a tiny, fragile thread being pulled. A domestic cat to save a wild bobcat? The thought, barely whispered by Lizzie, hung in the sterile air of the clinic, thick with the scent of antiseptic and fear. Emily felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. "Lizzie, are you serious?" Her voice was thin, strained. Scout, the bobcat kitten, lay nestled in a warmed incubator, his small chest rising and falling with an alarming fragility. His matted, ginger-spotted fur was still sticky in places where he'd been cleaned of debris and dried blood, a testament to the harsh existence he'd barely escaped. Each shallow breath was a prayer Emily wasn't sure would be answered. Lizzie, usually the picture of calm, wrung her hands. I know. It's unprecedented, unethical even by some standards, but we're losing him, Em. His vitals are dropping. He's not latching onto the bottle, and the supplemental feeding isn't enough. He's rejecting it." She gestured towards a small, almost imperceptible tremor running through Scout the bobcat kitten's tiny frame. "He needs comfort. He needs warmth. He needs something that feels natural." Emily's gaze flickered between the vulnerable bobcat and Lizzie's desperate face, introducing a house cat, a domesticated tabby, to a wild bobcat kitten. The risks screamed at her. Disease transmission, the potential for aggression from either animal, the very real possibility of imprinting Scout onto a domestic species, making his eventual release impossible. Her whole career was built on the meticulous scientific approach to rehabilitation, on minimizing human interaction, on fostering the innate wildness of every creature that passed through her hands. This was a radical departure, a leap into the unknown, driven purely by the raw, aching fear of losing another life. Scout the bobcat kitten stirred, a faint, almost imperceptible mewl escaping his tiny mouth. He didn't open his eyes, but his whiskers twitched, sensing the shift in the air. The giant's low rumblings were a constant presence, sometimes gentle, sometimes sharper, like the crackle of distant thunder. His small body ached, a dull, pervasive throb that radiated from his belly, where the hunger gnawed relentlessly. He remembered the sharp prick of a needle, a sudden, stinging intrusion, followed by a wave of dizzying warmth that had lulled him into a fitful sleep. Now the hunger was back, stronger, more insistent. His tiny paws, still clumsy and uncoordinated, instinctively pushed against the soft blanket, searching for something, anything that felt familiar. "Daisy is gentle," Lizzie pleaded, her voice a little softer now, recognizing Emily's internal struggle. She just had a litter herself and they were all adopted. Her maternal instincts are through the roof. She's quiet, calm, never shown an aggressive bone in her body. She's a tabby, not a show cat, just a sweetheart. Daisy, a stray Lizzie had taken in months ago, was indeed a picture of placid domesticity. But a domestic cat was not a wild bobcat. The chasm between their worlds felt insurmountable. Emily walked over to the incubator, pressing her hand against the warm plastic. Scout, the bobcat kitten's small head, was barely visible amidst the soft blankets. His ear, still slightly torn from whatever ordeal he'd endured before rescue, twitched. His tiny heart beat a frantic rhythm against her palm. He was fading. She saw it in the shallow rise and fall of his chest, in the slight pallor beneath his sparse fur. The scientific approach, the careful calculations, the textbook protocols, they weren't working. Not for this little one. He needed something more, something elemental, something beyond their clinical understanding. Daisy, the domestic cat, stretched, a long, languid arch of her back, her whiskers twitching as she caught a faint scent of something new, something intriguing through the air. Her kittens had gone, a sudden, inexplicable void where their small, kneading bodies used to be. A gentle giant had moved them, and though a part of her missed their warmth, a deep, instinctual yearning remained. Her milk was still full, a gentle pressure in her belly. She purred, a low rumble, as the giant's hand stroked her back. Their touch was always reassuring, a source of warmth and food. The world beyond the soft blankets and the gentle hands was a blur, but here, in this quiet space, she felt safe, her maternal instinct brimming, ready to give. The ethical dilemmas warred within her, a cacophony of doubt and desperation. But Scout, the bobcat kitten's life, his small, fragile spark, was dwindling. This wasn't about protocol anymore. This was about survival, about giving him a chance, however slim, however unconventional. She looked at Lizzie, her eyes pleading, "Are you absolutely certain Daisy is healthy? No parasites, up to date on everything?" Lizzie nodded, a flicker of hope in her tired eyes. "Absolutely. She's been fully vetted, even had extra checks this week. She's as clean as a whistle." Emily took a deep breath, the metallic tang of fear sharp in her mouth. "Okay," she whispered, the word feeling alien, weighty. "Okay, Lizzie, let's try it." But we observed them like hawks. Any sign, any hint of trouble, and we pull her. Immediately, this is our last shot. The decision felt like a surrender, a concession to the desperate primal needs of a dying creature over the reasoned scientific approach. It was a terrifying, agonizing choice, but as she looked at Scout, the bobcat kitten, a tiny, helpless bundle of spotted fur, she knew she had to try. Trust, she realized, wasn't just about the animals learning to trust them. It was about her trusting her instincts, even when they veered wildly off the well-worn path. A tiny purr, a giant leap for life. That's what Emily kept whispering to herself, a mantra against the tide of doubt. Scout, the little bobcat, was a bundle of raw nerves and instinct, a miniature wild creature trying to make sense of a world that had, thus far, only offered cruelty. It had been days since the rescue, and while the physical wounds were slowly mending, the emotional ones seemed stubbornly resistant. Scout would hiss at every approaching shadow, flatten himself into the back of the crate, and refuse all direct contact. Food was only eaten when no one was watching. Water only in the dead of night. Emily understood it, intellectually, the deep-seated trauma, the primal fear. But her heart ached for the little creature, for a sign, any sign, that healing was possible. Then came Daisy. Daisy, a calico cat of advanced years and even more advanced wisdom, had seen her share of broken animals come through Emily's sanctuary. She was the unofficial welcoming committee, The soft purr in the storm, the one who seemed to instinctively know which trembling creature needed space and which needed a gentle headbutt. Emily had debated it for hours with Dr. Aris, the vet. Introducing a domestic cat to a wild bobcat kit, even a traumatized one, was risky, but something in her gut, a whisper of hope, pushed her forward. The moment Daisy stepped into the quarantine enclosure, the air seemed to thicken. Scout, who had been restlessly pacing, froze. Daisy, with her usual unhurried grace, surveyed the small room. Her ears swiveled, taking in the faint scent of fear and disinfectant. Scout, its tiny muscles coiled, watched her every move, ready to bolt, ready to strike, ready to disappear. The humans, Emily and Dr. Aris, were on the other side of the glass, holding their breaths. Daisy ignored them, focusing solely on the small, trembling form huddled in the corner. She took another slow, deliberate step. Scout's heart hammered against its ribs. This new giant wasn't like the bipedal ones, the clumsy, loud creatures who smelled of medicine and pity. This one was low to the ground, moved with a silent grace, and smelled familiar. The scent was warm, comforting, yet utterly unknown in its experience. It wanted to hiss, to lash out, to remind this creature of the wild, untamed thing it was. But something held it back. A curious pull, a flicker of something long forgotten. A warmth it hadn't felt since before the hunger, before the cold, before the endless fear. Daisy took another step, then another. She lowered her head slightly, her gaze unwavering. Her tail twitched, a slow, gentle rhythm. Emily watched, her heart a drum in her chest. This was it, the moment of truth. Would Scout lash out? Would Daisy retreat? Then the sound, a soft, rumbling purr, low and resonant, began to emanate from Daisy. It filled the small enclosure, a vibrating lullaby against the stark silence. Emily's eyes welled up. It was Daisy's invitation, her offering of peace. Scout flinched. The sound was unfamiliar, yet not threatening. It was a vibration that settled deep in his chest, a strange warmth. Daisy, with no further hesitation, moved closer, her soft fur brushing against Scout's matted flank. And then, the most unexpected thing happened. Daisy began to nuzzle Scout, rubbing her head against the tiny bobcat's temple, her purr growing louder, more insistent. And then she started to lick. Slow, gentle licks, cleaning the dirt and fear from Scout's head. The sensation was overwhelming. The rough, yet strangely comforting texture of Daisy's tongue against its fur. The warmth, the relentless purr. Scout, which had rejected every human touch, every kind gesture, every attempt at comfort, instinctively did the only thing it could do. It leaned into the warmth. It pressed its small, trembling body against Daisy's soft side. And then, to everyone's astonishment, Scout, the wild, untamed, traumatized bobcat, began to nudge its head against Daisy's belly. It needed, a tiny, forgotten instinct surfacing from the depths of its being. And then, a miracle. Scout began to nurse. Emily gasped, a silent sob escaping her lips. Dr. Aris simply shook her head, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. Scout, the lost and broken bobcat, had found solace not in human hands, not in medicine, but in the most primal, unexpected act of nurturing. Daisy, the old calico, had offered what no human ever could. A mother's touch, a sister's comfort, a beacon of hope in the darkness. It was a moment that defied all expectations, a profound acceptance that bypassed trauma and fear, touching the deepest, most vulnerable part of a wild heart. In that small, sterile enclosure, life, raw and beautiful, was beginning anew. A hushed reverence settled over the rescue center, a silent testament to a miracle unfolding. Experts accustomed to the brutal realities of wildlife trauma found themselves utterly baffled, watching with bated breath as the tiny bobcat kit, Scout, defied every grim prognosis. Under Daisy's constant, unwavering care, Scout embarked on a recovery that could only be described as miraculous. The fear that had once clouded its young golden eyes began to recede, replaced by a nascent spark of curiosity. The harsh metallic tang of fear and starvation that had once permeated its tiny body slowly gave way to the comforting scent of milk and the soft, familiar musk of Daisy. Scout remembered the chilling bite of hunger, the hollow ache in its belly that gnawed relentlessly. Now there was the rhythmic pulse of Daisy's breathing against its small frame, the steady thrum of her purr vibrating through its bones, a lullaby of safety. The sticky, cloying sensation of the initial rescue, the giant hands that had grabbed it, the strange, cold prod of instruments, all were fading memories, replaced by the soft nudge of Daisy's nose, the gentle rasp of her tongue cleaning its fur. Its fur, once dull and matted, gained a healthy luster, reflecting the gentle light of the room. Its eyes, which had been clouded with pain and disorientation, brightened, now observing its new world with increasing awareness. The gaunt angles of its small body softened, gaining weight rapidly, each day bringing a noticeable roundness to its belly, a plumpness to its tiny limbs. Scout could feel the strength returning, the ability to stretch its paws without pain, to arch its back without a tremor. The bitter taste of dehydration, the sandpaper dryness in its mouth, was a distant memory, replaced by the warm, sweet flow of Daisy's milk. The humans, once terrifying looming giants, now moved with a deliberate gentleness. Their scent, initially alien and sharp, had become intertwined with Daisy's, a backdrop of watchful care. Scout noticed their murmurs, soft and low, always accompanied by the soothing presence of Daisy. Veterinarians and wildlife experts, initially skeptical, observed in awe, their clinical detachment often giving way to genuine wonder. They documented the unusual interspecies bond, meticulously noting Scout's thriving health, a trajectory far exceeding any reasonable expectation for a kit so gravely injured and abandoned. Scout, in its instinctual world, understood little of their charts or whispered consultations. It only registered the comforting pressure of Daisy's body, the steady rhythm of her purr, the reassuring scent of her fur. It knew the feeling of being picked up, of being gently examined, the brief prick of a needle followed by the warmth of a hand, and then always the immediate return to Daisy's protective embrace. The contrast was stark, the cold ground, the sharp fear, the gnawing emptiness of the past versus the soft nest, the full belly, the ever-present warmth of Daisy. They attributed much of Scout's miraculous survival not just to their advanced medical interventions, but overwhelmingly to Daisy's unwavering maternal instincts. The crucial colostrum she provided in those critical first hours had kick-started Scout's immune system, offering a lifeline of antibodies against the numerous threats a wild orphan faces. Her constant grooming, her tireless vigilance, her willingness to share her warmth and her milk. These were the immeasurable factors that had tipped the scales from certain death to a vibrant, if unconventional, new life. The experts' astonishment was palpable, their scientific understanding bending to the undeniable power of a mother's love that transcended the rigid lines of species. Scout, curled against Daisy's soft belly, felt only profound peace. The world beyond its warm nest a blurred, gentle hum. The trust it had tentatively placed in the giants, prompted by Daisy's own calm acceptance, had solidified into a quiet certainty. When love binds too tightly, it can become a cage of its own making. For Scout the bobcat kitten and Daisy the domestic house cat, their bond was a testament to the unexpected miracles that could bloom in the most broken of circumstances. Scout, once a shivering, half-starved wildling, had blossomed under Daisy's patient, unwavering devotion. His fur, once ragged and dull, now shone with the rich rust and black of a healthy bobcat. His eyes, once wide with perpetual fear, held a playful glint, particularly when locked onto Daisy's serene, emerald gaze. But growth in the world of rescue and rehabilitation often brought with it the bittersweet reality of letting go. The whispers from the giant humans had grown more frequent, their tones a mixture of concern and a gentle sadness. Scout didn't understand the words, but he felt the shift in the air, a tension that tightened in the muscles of the giants, a subtle tremor in their hands as they offered him treats. He was bigger now, strong enough to stalk the toy mice with a quiet intensity that hinted at his true nature, a hunter not meant for soft blankets and shared food bowls. The time was coming, they knew, for Scout to embrace the wild he was born for. The first attempt was gentle, almost a test. Scout was lured into a larger, more secure outdoor enclosure, designed to mimic the natural world with logs, branches, and soft earth. Daisy, usually a constant presence, was held back. The moment the latch clicked, severing their immediate connection, Scout's world tilted. The air, once comforting, felt thin and sharp. The familiar scent of Daisy, usually a constant anchor, was suddenly absent. He whirled, a frantic, small dynamo, pressing his face against the wire mesh, his tiny plaintive cries tearing through the stillness. It wasn't the excited chirps of a game, but a deep, guttural sound of pure terror and abandonment. Inside, Daisy paced, a frantic shadow, her sleek white fur bristling, her meows sharp and desperate, a sound Scout had never heard from her before. She clawed at the door separating them, her usually calm demeanor shattered. The giants, their faces etched with pain, watched the heartbreaking display for only minutes before relenting, reuniting the two distraught felines. The next separation attempt was more structured, planned with the precision of a medical procedure. Scout was moved to a different, isolated enclosure, a separate building even, to minimize their ability to hear or smell each other. The giant human, the one with the soft voice and gentle hands, carried Scout, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the human's chest. The journey was confusing. The scents were wrong, the air colder, and the familiar, comforting weight of Daisy was gone. When placed in the new space, Scout instinctively searched, his small head turning, his whiskers twitching, his nose working overtime. Finding nothing but unfamiliar smells and the sterile scent of the giant's cleaning solutions, a wave of primal fear washed over him. He cried not just whimpers, but long, drawn-out wails that scraped against the quiet. He refused the offered food, a tempting bowl of raw chicken, his favorite. He curled into the farthest corner, a small, trembling ball of spotted fur, his eyes dull with despair. Back in the main facility, Daisy was a whirlwind of distress. Her usually pristine white fur was disheveled from constant grooming and restless movement. Her meows were not just urgent, but mournful, a hollow echo of Scout's own cries, carried on the subtle currents of air. She refused to eat, refused to sleep, her body taut with an anxiety that seemed to consume her from the inside out. The giant humans tried to comfort her, stroking her back, offering her special treats, but she swatted their hands away, her claws extended, something she had never done before. Her green eyes, usually so placid, were wide and wild, reflecting a deep primal fear. She paced, a relentless back-and-forth motion that wore a path into the soft bedding. Her world had lost its center, and the absence of Scout was a void that threatened to swallow her whole. Days turned into a grueling week of these traumatic, unsuccessful attempts. Each time, the result was the same: profound distress for both animals. Scout, the wild bobcat, seemed to shrink, his spirited nature replaced by a listlessness that terrified the humans. He barely ate, his ribs becoming more prominent, his movements slow and lethargic. He cried himself to sleep, if sleep even came, his dreams likely filled with the terrifying absence of his adopted mother. Daisy, the gentle house cat, was a shadow of her former self, her once plump form now gaunt, her spirit broken. The giants, their faces etched with an increasing despair, knew they were doing more harm than good. The goal was rehabilitation, to prepare Scout for a life of freedom, but this forced separation was achieving the opposite, inflicting a deep, emotional wound that might never heal. It was a harrowing revelation. The love that had saved Scout was now unexpectedly threatening to destroy him. Their bond, so pure and miraculous, had twisted into an unhealthy, profound dependency, a tether that seemed impossible to sever. A new voice, a radical proposal. The air in the usually bustling intake ward felt strangely thin, charged with an unspoken tension that even Scout, the little bobcat, seemed to sense. He'd been napping soundly in Emily's lap, Daisy, the house cat, curled protectively against his back, a tangle of striped fur and contented purrs. Now Scout's ears twitched, rotating towards the low murmur of human voices from the observation room. He disliked new voices, new smells. They often meant change, and change in his short, chaotic life had rarely been good. Just yesterday, the soft, reassuring pressure of Emily's hands had been a balm, an anchor in the storm of his memories. He still flinched at sudden movements, the ghosts of harsh shoves and sharp kicks lingering in his small body. But the food, always plentiful and delicious, had started to erase the gnawing ache in his belly. The cool, clean water, tasting like mountain springs, had replaced the burning thirst. The soft blankets piled high in his quiet den had chased away the chill of the abandoned shed. He'd even begun to tolerate the needle pokes, a quick, sharp sting followed by Emily's soothing murmurs and the overwhelming relief as the aches in his body began to subside. He'd learned to trust the scent of her, the rhythm of her heartbeat, and he'd learned to trust Daisy, whose small, warm body was a constant, purring comfort, a shield against the unknown. Daisy was his, and he was hers. The murmur grew louder, punctuated by a new, resonant male voice that carried an undeniable authority. Emily's posture stiffened. Scout felt the subtle shift in her breath, the tightening of her arm around him. Something was wrong. His hackles, still barely noticeable, tried to rise. Daisy, ever vigilant, let out a soft, low growl, a rumble that vibrated through Scout's fur. He pressed closer to her warmth, burying his nose into the soft fur of her neck. Then the door opened. A tall, silver-haired man, impeccably dressed, stepped into the ward. He wasn't one of the usual giants, the ones who smelled of antiseptic and quiet compassion. This man smelled different, of expensive cologne and an almost intimidating calm. He didn't approach immediately, instead standing at a respectful distance, his gaze, sharp and intelligent, fixed on Scout and Daisy. Emily, with a nervous glance at the man, gently lowered Scout and Daisy into their familiar, cozy nest of blankets in a large, secure enclosure. This was Thomas Wilkins, a name whispered with reverence in the wildlife community, a man renowned for his unorthodox yet highly successful methods. He spent several long minutes simply observing, his expression unreadable. Scout, usually quick to retreat, found himself held by the intensity of the man's gaze, a gaze that seemed to penetrate beyond his small, striped exterior, right into the confused, wild heart beating within. Daisy, usually outgoing with trusted humans, remained glued to Scout's side, her tail lashing almost imperceptibly, a clear warning. The silence stretched, thick with expectation. Then Wilkins spoke, his voice surprisingly gentle yet firm. "Emily," he began, addressing her directly, "I've reviewed Scout's case, and I've seen the footage. I've also just witnessed firsthand their interaction." He gestured towards the two felines, nestled together, a perfect yin and yang of wildness and domesticity. The bond is undeniable. Frankly, it's unprecedented for a bobcat of his age, given his trauma history, to form such a profound attachment to a domestic cat. Daisy isn't just a companion, she's his anchor, his emotional support animal. Emily nodded, her own heart aching with the truth of his words. She'd spent weeks agonizing over Scout's future. The plan had always been to rehabilitate him, to release him back into the wild once he was healthy and independent. But how could she possibly separate him from Daisy, the tiny creature who had pulled him back from the brink? Wilkins continued, his voice gaining a new urgency. Standard protocol dictates a wild animal like Scout must be prepared for release, or if that's not possible, placed in a species-appropriate sanctuary. But Daisy complicates everything. To separate them now would be to re-traumatize Scout. It could reverse all the progress you've made. It could, quite frankly, be a death sentence for his spirit, even if his body survived. Emily felt a chill trace down her spine, a death sentence for his spirit. She understood. She knew it in her bones. Scout's dependence on Daisy was profound, a lifeline woven from purrs and shared naps and the silent language of two fragile creatures finding solace in each other. "So what do we do?" Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper, dread pooling in her stomach. She braced herself for the inevitable, for the difficult ethical choice she knew was coming. Try to wean Scout off Daisy, knowing the risks, or accept that Scout could never truly be wild again and face the complex future of two inseparable, unconventional companions. Wilkins took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping over both cats once more. My proposal is radical, Emily, and it will take significant resources, approvals, and a very specific environment. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Daisy must accompany Scout, not just for a transitional period, but permanently. They will need a specialized controlled habitat designed to meet the behavioral and enrichment needs of both a bobcat and a domestic cat. A place where Scout can express his wild instincts safely, and Daisy can continue to provide the unique emotional support he requires. Emily's breath caught. The shocking, yet potentially life-saving proposal hung in the air, transforming the impossible into a daunting possibility. Daisy, a house cat, living permanently with a bobcat in a specialized sanctuary? It was unheard of, a logistical nightmare, and a colossal undertaking. Yet a spark of hope ignited within her, pushing back against the fear. She looked at Daisy, curled tightly against Scout, her small head resting on his striped shoulder. Her eyes closed in utter contentment. The implications for Daisy, her life forever intertwined with a wild animal, were enormous. She was torn, deeply, agonizingly torn, between the daunting reality of Wilkins' proposal and the undeniable truth. Separating them was no longer an option. This wasn't just about Scout's survival, it was about Daisy's role in it, in the beautiful, strange, powerful bond they shared. A cat's choice, a wild cat's future. The words echoed in Emily's mind, a constant, agonizing rhythm against the steady beat of her own heart. Scout, the young bobcat, still carried the ghost of the wild within him, a flicker of untamed spirit that Emily knew deep down needed more than just her gentle hands to fully ignite. And Daisy, her sweet, intuitive house cat, had become the anchor, the comfort, the very essence of stability for the terrified wildling. But Emily understood the truth, a truth that clawed at her conscience. A domestic cat, however brave, could not permanently belong in the world Scout was destined for. Emily knelt on the worn rug, her arms wrapped around both animals. Scout still leaned from his ordeal, but with a new sheen to his spotted fur, purred a rumble against her side, his large paws kneading the fabric of her jeans. Daisy, however, was different. Her usual playful energy was subdued, replaced by a quiet intensity. She nudged Emily's chin with her head, then turned to nuzzle Scout's face, a soft, almost mournful sound rumbling in her throat. It was as if Daisy, with her profound feline wisdom, sensed the crossroads they stood at. She understood the weight of the choice, the unspoken burden on Emily's shoulders. The decision wasn't just about Scout's physical healing, it was about his soul, his very essence as a wild creature. To keep Daisy separate would be to sever a crucial lifeline for Scout's psychological recovery. But to let Daisy go, truly go, into a semi-wild life with Scout at the sanctuary, the thought was a lead weight in Emily's stomach. Daisy's eyes, a brilliant, intelligent green, fixed on Emily's, and then, slowly, deliberately, she walked over to Scout. She didn't just rub against him, she leaned into him, her small body pressing firmly against his larger muscled form. It was a declaration, a silent promise, a profound sacrifice Emily realized with a fresh wave of grief was being made not just by her, but by Daisy herself. Daisy, the pampered house cat, was choosing the wild, or at least the wild adjacent. She was choosing Scout's freedom over her own comfort, his future over her familiar hearth. The lump in Emily's throat grew to an unbearable size. This was more than just animal empathy. This was pure, unadulterated love, a bond so deep it transcended species. The conversation with Dr. Aris had been lengthy, punctuated by Emily's tearful admissions and the vet's calm, pragmatic advice. Scout needs Daisy, Emily, not just now, but for the transition. Her presence grounds him, gives him a reference point. He's learning to trust the world again through her. Dr. Eris explained the sanctuary had a unique, carefully monitored enclosure for cases like Scouts, a large naturalistic space where a bobcat could roam and hunt, but still receive supplemental care. And with Daisy, they could create a joint placement, a space where Daisy could still experience the comfort of human interaction, but also fulfill her critical role as Scout's emotional anchor. The day of their transfer arrived with a leaden sky that mirrored Emily's heart. Scout, surprisingly calm, settled into the padded carrier, his gaze flicking to Daisy, who with an air of dignified resolve, entered her own, smaller carrier. The drive to the sanctuary felt impossibly long, the silence punctuated only by the hum of the engine and the quiet thrumming of Emily's own anxiety. When they finally arrived, the sanctuary's headkeeper, a kind-faced woman named Sarah, met them. She spoke softly, explaining the protocol, the daily checks, the commitment to their well-being. Emily, her voice thick with emotion, could only nod. As the carriers were carefully placed into the acclimation enclosure, a vast semi-wild space designed to ease them into their new environment, Daisy looked at Emily one last time. It was a look of pure devotion, but also of quiet understanding. "Go on, my brave girl," Emily whispered, her hand pressing against the carrier. "Go be free with him." As the carriers were opened, Scout hesitated for a moment, then bounded out, exploring the rustling leaves and new scents with a cautious curiosity. Daisy, however, paused. She looked back at Emily, her eyes conveying a silent farewell, a profound acceptance of her new destiny. Then, with a graceful leap, she joined Scout, rubbing against his side, her small white body a beacon of domesticity in the wild expanse. Emily watched them, two disparate souls united by circumstance and love, disappear into the undergrowth of their new home. Her heart was shattered yet full. Daisy had made her choice, ensuring Scout's future, and in doing so, had made the ultimate sacrifice, her old life, for his new one. Emily walked away from the enclosure, the echoes of a cat's purr and a wild cat's future ringing in her ears, knowing that some bonds forged in the crucible of fear and nurtured by trust were meant to transcend even the deepest divides. The softest rumble, a sound that bypassed the thrumming pain in Scout's whole body and resonated deep in his chest, stirred something ancient within him. It was a purr. Not his own, not the broken, ragged attempts he'd made in the brief moments of less agony, but a clear, insistent vibration that felt like medicine. He felt a feather-light weight press against his side, a warmth that wasn't the sterile heat of the blanket draped over him, a small, persistent nudge. The scent, familiar yet distant, wafted over him, a clean, comforting scent of hearth and home, of safety that he hadn't known for what felt like an eternity. He registered soft fur rubbing against his matted flank, a gentle, rhythmic licking that began to work on the tangled knots near his shoulder. The pain was still there, a constant companion, but it dulled, softened by this unexpected, miraculous presence. A ghost of a memory, of soft fur, of playful pounces, of shared sunbeams. The giant, Emily, had brought this small, white creature. She had spoken in the same soft, soothing murmurs that had become less terrifying over the past few days, words that promised relief, even if his body still screamed protest. When she gently set the small creature down, a wave of familiar comfort, a forgotten sense of belonging, had washed over him. Daisy. He remembered that name, the small white fluff ball who had shared his earlier, safer days before the hunger and the fear had consumed everything. Daisy, she was purring, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through his bones, through the very air, chasing away the metallic tang of medicine and the sharp scent of antiseptic. Her tiny head butted his, insistent, forgiving. He had pushed her away once, hadn't he? When the hunger and the confusion had made him lash out, made him forget the gentle touch. But she was here, unwavering, offering the very thing he'd thought was lost forever: trust. A weak, almost imperceptible rumble started in his own chest, a rusty engine trying to catch. It wasn't the powerful purr of his healthy days. But it was there, a response, a desperate acknowledgement of the bond that transcended pain and fear. It was for her, for Daisy, the unwavering anchor in his storm-tossed world. He felt the giant's hand then, not the probing, uncomfortable touch of earlier, but a gentle stroke along his back. Emily. She was speaking again, her voice low and steady. He didn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. Relief, triumph, and immense care. He didn't flinch. The fear, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, was a distant echo, muffled by the continuous, comforting rumble of Daisy's purr beside him. Hours later, the small bowls appeared. Food. He'd ignored it for days, the scent nauseating, the effort of lifting his head too much. But now, with Daisy still nestled close, her warmth a constant reminder of safety, the hunger returned. A gentle, insistent gnawing that he could finally acknowledge. Emily's hand held the bowl steady, a small, meaty morsel offered tentatively. He took it, the first solid food in what felt like an eternity. It was bland, soft, but it was nourishment. Each small bite was a victory, a step back from the brink. The bitter medicine, usually forced down his throat with a struggle, was now taken with less protest, chased by another gentle lick from Daisy. The pain was still there, a dull ache, but it was no longer all-consuming. It was a background hum to the purring, the gentle stroking, the slow, steady return of his strength. He felt his own heart begin to beat with a steady rhythm again, not the frantic thrum of a trapped, terrified creature, but the measured pulse of one beginning to heal. The giant wasn't so scary anymore. Emily, she was a source of warmth, of food, of this miraculous comfort, and Daisy, his small white shadow, was the ultimate medicine. The bridge back to himself, the healing touch had returned. Love. It was the strongest healer of all, a force more potent than any medicine, deeper than any wound. It hummed in the air, a silent song that finally, truly, began to mend what had been so broken. Scout, the little bobcat, stirred. The dull throb that had been a constant companion in his tiny body had receded, replaced by a warmth that spread from his stomach outward, chasing away the shivers that once racked him. He'd woken up many times before, each time to a new indignity, the cold steel of a table, the pinch of a needle, the insistent prodding of giant gloved hands. Fear had been a knot in his belly, tight and agonizing. But now the fear was loose, unraveling with each slow, steady breath. The world smelled different here, not of stale desperation and damp earth, but of clean hay, a faint medicinal tang, and something else, something soft and familiar. He pushed himself up, his limbs still a little wobbly, but no longer aching with every movement. The small space he was in felt safe, enclosed, not like the vast, terrifying emptiness he'd known before the giants found him. He remembered the blinding light of their capture, the sudden enclosure, the confusing, rapid movements that had made his tiny heart hammer against his ribs. He'd hissed, a pathetic puff of air from his small throat. But the giants hadn't hurt him further. They had been strangely gentle, a new sensation after only knowing harshness. He stretched, a deep, satisfying arch of his back, feeling the pull of muscles that hadn't been used in true comfort for too long. He jumped down from the raised platform, landing softly on padded paws. The urge to explore, long suppressed by pain and weakness, was finally returning. He sniffed the air again, a low, rumbling purr starting deep in his chest. It was the scent of home, or what had become home. The scent of Daisy, the small house cat, was unmistakable, interwoven with the clean, fresh smells of this new den. He padded to the clear barrier, his whiskers twitching, and peered out. The space beyond was larger, filled with sunlight that dappled through leafy branches. And there, curled together in a warm patch of sun, were two familiar shapes. His heart gave a joyful leap. Patch, Rascal, his siblings. The last time he'd seen them, they'd been huddled together, weak and shivering, their tiny bodies pressed against their mother's cold, unmoving form. A wave of memory, sharp and painful, washed over him. The strange, still quiet of his mother, the growing hunger, the cold. Then the giants had come and snatched them all away. But now they were here, alive. And Daisy, the small, fierce protector, was with them. Daisy, who had licked his wounds, groomed his matted fur, and purred a comforting rhythm against his side, even when he was too weak to respond. She wasn't their mother, not truly, but in the confusing, terrifying days after the giants had taken them, she had been a warm, living comfort. She had kept the fear at bay, a small, purring sentinel. A giant hand reached in, unlatching the barrier. Scout tensed, but only for a moment. This giant was different. Its movements were slow, predictable. Its scent familiar, the same one that often carried the scent of delicious, meaty food. He darted out, a flash of spotted fur, making straight for his siblings. Patch looked up, his ears swiveling, and then he saw Scout. A chirp, pure joy escaped his throat, and he launched himself forward. They tumbled together, a tangle of small spotted bodies, purring and nipping with gentle, playful bites. Rascal joined in, a whirlwind of energy, batting at Scout's ears, then his tail. The sheer relief, the uncomplicated joy of being reunited was overwhelming. It was a language they all understood, a primal bond that transcended the fear and the pain they had endured. They were together again, a family, fragmented and almost lost, but now whole once more. And Daisy watched them, her tail twitching slowly, her purr a deep thrumming sound. She had found these small, shivering bundles of fur and instinctively, irrationally adopted them. She had licked away their sickness, comforted their cries, and taught them how to play. She knew, deep in her cat heart, that they weren't her kittens, but they were her family. She had woven herself into their lives, a small, black and white thread in their wild, spotted tapestry, and they in turn had accepted her completely, their fear of the big, strange world tempered by her unwavering presence. Scout, full of newfound strength, pounced on Rascal, initiating a wrestling match that ended with both of them rolling in the soft hay. He felt invigorated, alive in a way he hadn't thought possible. The pain was gone, the hunger satiated by the easily digested rich food the giants provided. The cold nights were a distant memory, replaced by the warmth of hay and the comfort of his siblings' bodies pressed close. And always the quiet, reassuring presence of Daisy. She was the anchor, the steady heartbeat of their strange, beautiful family. The giants still came and went, sometimes carrying sweet-smelling concoctions, sometimes just watching, their gazes soft and unthreatening. Scout no longer cowered. He knew now that their hands, though huge, were gentle. Their voices, though rumbling, were soothing. He even allowed one giant, a female with a kind face and soft hands, to stroke his head sometimes, a deep rumble of purrs escaping him. Trust, earned painstakingly, slowly had blossomed. He knew with the certainty of a creature reborn that this was home, this was safety, this was family, and Daisy, the small, brave house cat, was the heart of it all. A forever family, a timeless tale of hope, whispered on the wind and etched into the very soul of the sanctuary. Years had softened the edges of time, yet the vivid memory of a tiny, trembling bobcat kitten remained. Now Emily, her hair a distinguished silver, her hands a little more gnarled but still gentle, walked the familiar paths of the sanctuary, her heart full. She was retired now, but the legacy of the wild heart she'd helped mend lived on. A vibrant, purring testament to unwavering care. Bob, once a trembling scrap of fear, was a magnificent creature now. His wild instincts, once suppressed by trauma, had blossomed into powerful grace. His tawny fur, once matted and dull, gleamed with health, each spot a perfect testament to his wild heritage. He stalked the perimeter of his vast habitat, a silent, powerful shadow, yet his steps would soften, his powerful frame relax whenever he approached the familiar, sleeping form of Daisy. She was old now, her calico fur faded in places, her movements slower, but her spirit, that unwavering fount of courage and affection, remained undimmed. Emily watched, a lump forming in her throat, as Bob lowered his large head, a soft rumbling purr emanating from his chest, and nudged Daisy. The domestic cat, barely a third of his size, stretched languidly, her cloudy green eyes blinking open before she reached up, a tiny, almost toothless lick to groom the powerful bobcat's cheek. It was a gesture as old as their improbable bond, a quiet affirmation of a love that transcended all boundaries of species or size. Shadow, the more skittish of the trio, still kept a respectful distance from most human interaction, a ghost among the trees. But he too sought the familiar warmth of Daisy. He would often watch her from afar, his intense amber eyes tracking her slow, deliberate movements. When she napped in a sunbeam, he would sometimes curl up a few yards away, a silent sentinel, his presence a protective shadow. There was no fear in his gaze now, only a quiet understanding. The humans, those towering giants who had once snatched him from the cold, uncaring wilderness, were now simply part of the landscape, a benign presence that provided food and safety. He no longer felt the burning emptiness in his belly, the gnawing anxiety of constantly searching for the next grab. Instead, the cool water tasted clean, the offered meat was plentiful, and the soft earth beneath him felt safe. The harshness of his early life, the hunger, the constant threat, was a fading nightmare replaced by the gentle rhythm of sanctuary life. Daisy, the brave little house cat, the unexpected surrogate mother, had taught them all a profound lesson. She had shown them that tenderness could exist even in the face of fear, that an unlikely bond could bloom where none was expected. She had groomed away the fear, licked away the pain, and purred a lullaby of trust into their bewildered little bobcat ears. For her, the human giants had always been a source of comfort, a warm hand, a gentle stroke. She had learned early that their touch meant food, meant safety, and she in turn had become the bridge, the living, breathing testament to that trust. Emily could still remember the sting of the needle for their initial vaccinations, the unfamiliar confinement of the carrier, but she could also recall the overwhelming relief when a warm, soft blanket was tucked around them, the taste of clean, cool water on a parched tongue, and the steady, comforting thrum of a human voice, low and gentle, promising safety. The three bobcats, Bob, Shadow, and Luna, were inseparable, a testament to their shared beginnings, their shared journey from fear to freedom. Luna, the smallest, but perhaps the most mischievous, would often instigate playful chases with her brothers, her powerful leaps and bounds a blur of spotted fur. She was confident, inquisitive, her amber eyes sparkling with intelligence. She would sometimes approach Emily, her tail held high, a soft chirrup escaping her throat, a greeting and acknowledgement. It wasn't the kind of interaction one might expect from a wild bobcat, but then, their family wasn't conventional. Their trust had been hard-won, built brick by painful brick, each gentle touch, each patient moment, a step away from the shadows of their past. Emily watched them, her heart swelling with a bitter-sweet joy. She had dedicated her life to these creatures, to understanding their fear, to mending their broken spirits. And in return, they had given her a gift beyond measure, the unwavering faith of a wild heart, the quiet gratitude of a creature rediscovered. The image of Daisy, tiny and frail, still cherished by the magnificent bobcats, was the true jewel of the sanctuary. It was a beacon of hope, a reminder that true family transcends all boundaries, species, size, even the very essence of wildness itself. Their story, whispered on the wind and echoing through the sanctuary, was a testament to love's boundless capacity, an enduring legacy of rescue, rehabilitation, and the unbreakable bonds of an unconventional, beautiful family. If this video touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Just drop a simple comment. Maybe type 1 if you'd welcome more story like this, or 0 if you just want to say you were here, or sharing your thoughts about the video. We'll see you on the next video.